So today we'll be talking about testing in Python, so writing tests in Python. T'as coupé ton micro parce que... Okay. Okay. Sorry. No, it's fine. So to get started, if you go to the links website, so links.fr, and to activities, working groups, Python workshop, and testing in Python. So you have all the information for the event, but most importantly, you have the links to the slides. So I will present the slide, but if you want to check them afterwards, you have the slide, a progress sheet, but I will explain, and the code that we will use today. So maybe I will send the link in Zoom for those. Chat. Okay. So so I will start with the slides and then I will explain the rest afterwards. So so why do we want to write tests in Python? So Python is dynamic and interpreted language. So what do I mean by dynamic? It's mostly that you don't explicitly specify the types of variables in Python, like you just write a equal 1 or a equal a string or whatever, but you never explicitly, at least by default, specify the type of your variables or the type of the parameters expected by a function. So so that makes it very easy to write code, but that also makes it easier to introduce bugs in the code. And also it's an interpreted language, meaning that there's like no compilation step to catch errors. So actually there's a small compilation step from text to byte to Python bytecode, but it only catches syntax errors. It doesn't catch like type errors or other kind of errors that can be detected like by the C or C++ compiler, this kind of compile language. So it means that errors, they tend to show up at runtime when you execute the program. Okay, so when you write code, the basic Python code, the basic thing you do, you write code, you run your program, you change the code, you write your program, and so on. So it can get, tiresome after some time, and so it's not very efficient to do this. So the first solution is to, one solution, that both are complementary, but one solution is to use a static analysis tool. So maybe some of you, they know, or we will talk in future workshop about PyLint or Flake 8. So they are software that just read the source code and try to find bugs like infinite loops, a function that doesn't return anything, and this kind of stuff. And you can also, again, we will not talk about this today, but you can also add type annotations to your function, so your variables, and explicitly say that the expected types of the variables, and you have tools that can check whether your types are consistent or not. So so that's one solution, but the other one that we will talk about today is automated tests. So the idea of automated test is to write code to test code. Okay, so instead of manually testing your code, like running it, writing input and checking the output and so on, the goal is to write code that automatically tests your code. So there's many benefits of doing that. The first one is that you will increase the confidence in the correctness of your code. So automated tests, in general, they can't prove that your code is correct. Okay, there is other methods that we will not discuss here, like to test all the possible input for a program or other kind of methods to make sure that your code is correct. But by writing enough tests with enough different inputs, you can make sure that you can be reasonably confident that your code is correct. It also increases your productivity, since you don't have always to run your program manually. You can just press a button or use the command line to automatically run hundreds of thousands of tests against your code and check if everything is still working. You can detect regression. So regression is when something is working at some point in time, but stops working after some point. So today your code is working, but maybe you will change a part of your code the next day, and you will break something. So regression is when something break, and you can automatically detect that with tests. It also facilitates refactoring. So especially in Python, so in languages like Java or C++, if you want, so language which have like a strong type system, if you want to rename a variable or parameters of a function or this kind of thing across all your code base, it's very easy and most likely it's going to work. In Python, tools doesn't work so well. So it's possible that if you want to rename a variable across all your code base, you will introduce errors in your program. So if you have tests, you can easily check that you haven't broken anything by doing that. And also, maybe we'll see that a bit today, but it encourages you to write code that is easy to test and that is more modular. Okay, the way you write tests, it's easier to test if you have small functions that have a well-defined input and output pairs. So it makes you, I would say, write better code to write automated tests. So there's three, let's say, three main approaches for writing a test in Python. So the first one that we will talk about today, and I think it's one of my favorite feature of Python, it's called Doctest. So in Python, you can write documentation with what's called doc strings. So it's when you put the three quotes like this, and you can document. So for example, here I have a class bank account, which we will use today, and I have a documentation which says that it's a very insecure bank account. But you can also write your test directly in the documentation. So here I have a small test that creates an account, deposits like 10 euro on the account, and check that the balance of the account is equal to 10 euro. So it's very nice because you have an example at the same place as your documentation, and you can also make sure that your example, they are correct, that they work with the current version of your code. So it's a very, very useful feature that we will use today. The second one that we will not use today, but is useful to know about, is the unit test module, which is also built into Python. So Doctest and unit test, they have built-in features. And you can write in another file test about your code. So you can write more complex tests that maybe are too long to write in the Doctest and so on. You can test for many things, equality, approximate equality, this kind of stuff, but they are a bit verbose to write, right? You have to define a class and so on. So what I will talk about today instead is a library which is not built in, but which is very popular, it's called PyTest. And with PyTest, you simply define functions that start with test and whatever name you want, and you write assertions. So here I create an account and I write an assertion that after I deposit 10 euro in my account, the balance should be equal to 10 euro. So today we will be talking about Doctest and PyTest, because I think they are like the nicest and most popular test frameworks for Python. But just know that unit test also exists, and you may encounter it in some code base. So today we will talk about Doctest and PyTest. The code can, so I will give you some code and with some to-dos that I will let you try to perform the task, and I will let you ask me if you have questions, and I will help you. You can follow it either in Pycharm, which we have introduced in the previous workshops. So if you use Pycharm, in the to-do panel of Pycharm, you can see all the to-dos, or you can use whatever text editor you want, Visual Studio Code, VIM, Emacs, whatever, and run the commands from the terminal. I have written in the file I have written either how to do things with Pycharm or how to do things with the terminal. So you can do it with both. And sorry, then, I think we can get started. So you can go to the webpage I've shared in the chat or on the links website, which is called Testing in Python, the page of the event. And download, or at least create in Pycharm or wherever you want, 2 files, which are named account.py and testaccount.py. Create those 2 files and then open the progress sheet. So the progress sheet is, you have the link on so you have the slides, which I've just presented, you have the progress sheet. And so what you can do on the progress sheet is just write your name and sorry, I need to add a checkbox here and just check. And you just check the steps. Okay, so you will see with different, so for example, the first to do is to run the doc test. And I explain also when you run the doc test, you can just check the box. I have run the doc test. Okay, so it's useful for me to, or maybe François, for helping you if you have an issue. And that's all. So please go to the Testing in Python webpage, download the 2 files, either put them in Pycharm. So if you use Pycharm, personally, I have created a small project which I named Testing in Python, but you can put whatever you want. And I've just put the 2 files into it, account.py and testaccount.py. And it also works. If you're not using this, you can just go into terminal, create the 2 files, and run the command manually. Okay, so please do this. Follow first the to-dos in the account.py file, and when you have done this, you can go to the to-dos in the test account.py file, and let me know if you have any issue or any questions. So I will let you do the first to-dos, and at some point I will explain some more advanced features. When we will go into the second file, I will give you some explanation on parametrized test, fixtures, and PyTest marks. But I think you can already get started with the first file. So while we are in the Doctest, I just want to add that Doctest can be indeed, as we are doing here, part of the code. So here we have a Doctest which is in the code, but the Doctest can also be in a text file or a RST file or another file which is not a Python file. So if you like to write your documentation in outside of, I mean, you can have documentation outside of the code, and you can also write Doctest with this syntax, so the three rows, and you can by running python.m.doctest and for example account.txt or this kind of file, it will also work. Okay, it works. And also maybe I should have explained, but I think it's self-explanatory, but the code is about a very simple class which is represents a bank account, and there's like 4 methods: one to get the current balance of the account, one to cancel the last transactions, one to deposit money, and one to withdraw money. So you can't deposit a negative amount of money, and you can't withdraw more money than you actually have in the account. But as we will see in the second file, there's actually a bug in this code, which actually allows you to withdraw a limited amount of money. So but I will come back to that in a second time.
Maxime?
Oui.
J'ai une question très stupide parce que, comme je n'ai pas l'habitude de Pycharm, à part la présentation de la fois d'avant,
Ouais.
Très bien dans le terminal, mais dans le run machin, je ne vois pas où.
Alors, donc là, si tu vois mon écran,
Mmh.
alors d'ailleurs, je vais supprimer, il faut que je supprime tout ça pour que ce soit dans le même état. Donc là,
Maxime, excuse me, can you repeat the question in English and answer in English?
Sorry. Yes.
My fault.
I can repeat. So the question was how actually to run the test So from the terminal, you can use this command Python -m doctest and the name of the file. But the question was how to run it from Pycharm. So Zoom is very annoying. Okay, so if you have the file open, you go to the run menu and you choose run again. So run, and here it should ask you what you want to run. So if you choose account, it's going to run the Python file as if you were doing Python account.py, but that's not what we want to do because this file is not doing anything by itself. There's no main function. So if you run, we don't do anything. So what we want to do is run and choose doctest, because Pycharm should automatically detect that we have doctest and it should suggest us doctest. So if you choose run doctest, it should, now it works, it's running the doctest.
For me, it's only showing run and 0 edit configurations.
Okay, so in this case, so let's try this. I need to remove this. Let's try. So let's do run edit configuration.
Yes.
So you can do add new and choose doctest. Add new.
Okay,
doctest. And I think test in script and yeah, I think in script and then choose the yes, François.
Barbara, excuse-moi. Si tu essayes juste de faire run le fichier, est-ce que ça fait quelque chose? Parce que déjà ça va, parce que si ça t'affiche pas le doctest, c'est peut-être tout simplement que t'as pas de compilateur d'interpréteur qui est configuré.
Je dois en avoir un parce que dans la fenêtre, si je fais par terminal en bas dans le Pycharm, il me le fait, pas de problème.
D'accord.
Ok, alors on peut essayer de faire donc add new doctest et dans script ici mettre le chemin vers le fichier. Donc moi il doit être là-dedans, testing in Python, account.py. Donc I just did add new configuration, doctest, put the path, okay, and is this working? And this is working. So it's strange because usually it always works automatically, but if it's not, for some reason, you can do this and it should work.
Okay.
I have the same problem actually.
Okay. Okay. That's so you created a new project by doing like file new project and put the two files into it. If you have something like this, so I can remove that, but if you have this structure, it should detect it automatically. Also check that you have a Python interpreter defined. So if on the lower right part of the screen, if it's written like Python something and not like no interpreter selected or something like that. The nice thing about doing it in Pycharm instead of the command line is that then you have like a breakdown of each test. So let me.
Hello. Yes, it's for me. I had the same problem, but when I did the configuration that you suggested in the project, it seems that now when I do the right click, I can run the doctest. So maybe you could try, Barbara.
Yes, maintenant ça marche. It now works.
Okay.
So okay, cool. So the nice thing is that you have a breakdown of your test in Pycharm, and if you click on a test, you can see the specific output of this test. So if you don't see all of them, you should check the show passed and show failed, show ignore test. So that way you can see all the tests and you have a breakdown. And yeah, let me show you something that's very useful. So let's say that you have something that returns an array, so 1, 2, 3, and that instead you get like 2, 3, 4. So let's write something like this and run this test. Pycharm can show you the difference between what you get and what is expected. So here it's a very simple example, but if you have like an array with thousands of values and that you have just one which is changing, well, from the command line, it's maybe not easy to find which part change, but in Pycharm it can, and it works also with dictionaries and other kind of Python objects. So it's pretty useful to find where the difference is.
Just a question, maybe you explained it, but I missed it. How do you handle exceptions in Doctest?
Yes.
For example, for withdraw, I have the problem.
Okay, so let's write something that will raise an exception. So withdraw 11, for example. So if I run this, I have an exception. So if I'm not mistaken, the syntax you should write. So the first line of the exception, which is trace back, then 3 dots, I think like this, and then the name of the exception.
T'as pas besoin des points de suspension, Maxime.
Je peux juste mettre ça?
Ouais, je pense.
Okay, and if you do this,
you need the 3 dots, but with no indentation.
I think it works like this also.
I think it works like this.
It works, and so if you do this, it works.
In fact, Doctest, I think, doesn't care what you put between the traceback line and the last line. You can put Toto. I think it will work.
Yeah. Okay. You can put whatever you want to work. So no, but if it's indented, okay. But yeah, the minimal thing to write is traceback and the name of the exception. And you can check that now if you are not raising the exception, then it says expected an exception and didn't get one. So
thank you.
So a limitation, at least to me, of just check time. Okay, of the Doctest is the if you have very long lines of inputs or outputs, I think it kind of makes it harder to read. And also it's not easy to break lines. So I think Francois explained to me last time how to do it, but I don't remember. But I think it's not easy like to have multi-line inputs or outputs, or not very convenient at least. So.
In fact, to break lines, you simply need to put in the continuation line, instead of putting arrows, you put dot.
Okay, so if I do, for example, can I do something like, you mean something like this, for example?
Yes, but without indentation for the 3 dots. And then after the 3 dots, you indent like you would indent usually. But
okay, it's working indeed.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can. Okay, that's not bad. But and if you have a multi-line output, can you do this?
If you have a multi-line output, you just put it normally.
Yeah, but if for example, here, if I want to test for like an array with 1,000 elements, I have to put this really long line.
Yes, but but you can use ellipses, for example, in that case.
Ah, okay. So I can do something like this. This works.
Yes, but just after list range 1,000, you will have to put a magic comment. So space sharp. In capital, you will put Doctest. Column, 2 points, plus, and in capital letter, ellipses. And maybe you should close the brackets.
Okay.
What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? Yeah.
Let me check. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe it's okay. So maybe I should write it in lowercase.
Maybe Doctest was in lowercase. Sorry.
Yeah, let's try this. That's very useful. Okay, I'm learning something. Okay. So thanks. That's so maybe it's not so bad to write if you have a big input.
No, in fact, if my sound is awful. Okay. If I may, the main limitation for Doctest, I think, is that all that you are going to put in the Doctest, by definition, will be in the documentation. So it's meant to test the code, but also to make it understandable by the user. And if you have, for example, many edge cases that you need to test because you want to test that there will not be a bug if somebody tries to put an infinite amount, you want to test that there won't be a bug if people put a complex number as the amount and so on. Maybe you don't want that all these tests are in the documentation because they will just mess up with the documentation.
Yeah, so, it's also useful to keep it like kind of short. Okay, so I see that everyone has run the Doctest, so let me complete this part with you and we can move on. So by default, we have this code. If we run it, the test fails, right? Because if we deposit 10 euros and we have 0 euro at the beginning, we expect to have 10. So we can change 9 to 10 and run again. And now the test, we say that the test pass because all the we have all the outputs are matched the expected output. So I can add quickly other tests. So like a test for the withdraw method. So I can if I withdraw 5, I still have 5. I can also then withdraw more than I have, so 6, for example. And here I should get an exception. So as we just discussed, syntax for an exception is this. And then I can also quickly test the rollback method. So if I roll back the last one which worked, which was this one, I will have again 10 euro on my account. Okay, so that's it for Doctest. It's very, I think you can see by yourself, but it's very convenient to document your code. Make sure that your code example, they actually work. Okay, it means that what the example you put in your documentation, they actually work with the same version of your code. So I think that's something very powerful to, because so many times you go to a documentation and the examples, they don't match the actual version of the code. So, so Doctest, I think very, very useful feature of Python. So that's cool, but maybe we want to write more complex code, tests, maybe tests that we don't want to be part of the documentation and so on. So the second tool is, we'll see, it's called PyTest. And basically PyTest, what it does, when you run PyTest, it will check for all the file that starts with test. And inside each file that starts with test, it will run the function that starts with test. Okay, so that's the only thing you need to know about PyTest, that you create file that starts with test and function that starts with test, and it will run them. And with PyTest, so we create file which starts with test, function which starts with test, and you write assertions. So basic Python assertions, and PyTest will check the code file. So I can run this for you. So I can do it either in the command line. So I do PyTest, I can just do PyTest. So if I just do PyTest like this, so here the test, they pass by default, but we don't really know what's happened. So we can use the verbose mode with -v. And here we have all the tests, and if they pass, or if they don't pass. And we can also run the Doctest actually. If we use --doctest-modules, PyTest will also run the Doctest in the file that doesn't start with test. So it can also be useful to run everything at once. We can also do it in Pycharm. So in Pycharm, either we do run Python test for test, run Python test for in-test account.py. And here we have a summary of the test. If it's not working for you, as it was for some people, you can do add a configuration and choose, instead of Doctest, you choose PyTest. And in target, you choose the test account file. and it's working as expected. So PyTest is not a built-in feature of Python, so you need to install it. So in a terminal, you can just run pip install PyTest, and it will install it. So please try to follow the to-dos in this file. So install PyTest, try to run the test with Pycharm or in the terminal. You can also run a single test. So if you have many tests and you just want to debug one, you can run a single one, and actually you can also debug them in Pycharm easily. So last time we saw the debugger in Pycharm, and if I want to debug this test, I can add breakpoint in the test and run the debugger on the test and check like what, for example, is the state of my account and so on. So very, very useful. So please, no test. Okay, I will wait for some people to go a bit further, and then we will, in the last 10 minutes, we will discuss the more advanced features of PyTest. And also something that I can mention is that if you want to write Doctest, if you like the syntax of writing Doctest, because it's, I mean, kind of nice, you don't have to write assertions and so on, you can put Doctest in a PyTest file. So I can write like test with Doctest, something like this. And here you can write Doctest actually. Account 10. And if I, so you can also write Doctest in a PyTest file. So if you don't want them to be part of the documentation, but still wants to use the Doctest syntax, you can also do this.
I think maybe you will need to put a path in your function, Maxime. No.
Sorry, a path.
Path PASS in the test deposit with the test.
Yeah. I think you don't need, if you have a doc string, you don't need to put a pass. It works.
Really?
Yeah, I saw that last time.
Okay, I didn't know.
This doesn't work, but
okay.
Just this, I think it's okay. So
okay.
I think it's what I've done for the exceptions here. The class, I don't even have to pass or something. It works.
Okay. By the way, I asked you a private question in the chat about the last question. About the vulnerability issue.
Okay, so maybe
don't tell me publicly.
Yeah, but that's not the one I was thinking about. But maybe you found another one. So don't use this code actually to
run my bank account. No, baby.
To run your bank account, because it's actually I think I was discussing this with Mathieu, but I think it raises interesting questions, about who you trust, because if you have this actual kind of code, then you also need, to trust the interpreter, and then maybe where do you stop to trust, like the CPU or whatever? Because, like checking, for example, if the person has the right amount of money is just a Boolean, right? And you can recompile the Python interpreter to inverse false into true. I know, but with this kind of checks like this, it's so I know that there is like methods to guard against this kind of thing at the hardware level and so on. But still, it's when the stakes are high, like in this bank, it's there's a paper by I think it's called something like Trusting Trust. Reflection on Trusting Trust by Ken Thompson. So, which is the guy who has created the Go language. And but the paper is much older, and he explained that, like, well, maybe you need also to trust your compiler, because your compiler can, you know, change your code, and you will never see that it has changed. So I don't know, it's interesting to think about that. And speaking of PyTest, so with the Doctest, we could check for an exception using the syntax, so traceback, and then the name of the exception. In PyTest, we can use a context manager. So a context manager in Python is just a code block that starts with, then a function, and then in this code block, you write other code. So if you write with PyTest that raises the name of the expected exception, the test will succeed if this exception was raised inside the code block. If it wasn't, the test would fail.
I have a question about, you're talking about the green, clicking on the green arrow on the last to do. Where do you have it exactly in your?
So I don't know if you, so in Pycharm, so
yes.
if you look at my screen, it should be, for example, this green arrow.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And you just choose run Doctest, and it's going to run just this Doctest.
Okay.
You could also use the right click if you prefer.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. You can also do right click and choose run Doctest.
Okay. Thank you.
So to explain a few things in the last 10 minutes. So the first test, so let me remove this one, but the first test, they are like very basic. Okay, so here the goal was more to introduce how to write tests, right? In Python, but not specifically this. I mean, discussing how to write good tests and so on. There's a lot of resources on that on the internet, like what you should test. For example, a good thing is to test, what personally I like is to test edge cases, right? To test your program using like minus infinite, 0, plus infinite, this kind of value, which tends to produce errors. But anyway, there's many things to look for if you want to write good tests. So maybe that will be the subject of another workshop. Here I'm just writing 2 tests, but maybe, I don't know, maybe if I were to run this a third time, the program will break for some reason and will return like 100, or I don't know. So one way to do this a bit better is what's called parametrized test. And basically you can create a test with some inputs, in this case, a list of deposits and an expected balance, and specify all the inputs you want. So I can add, in this case, I'm running it with a deposit of 10 and 20 euro, and I expect a balance of 30 euro. And here I'm running it with 5 euro, 0 euro, 0 euro, and I expect a balance of 5 euro. So you can add as many as you want and automate the test. If you want to go further, there's a library which I really like, which is called Hypothesis. And basically with Hypothesis, so is there an example somewhere? So you can say that your input, for example, is text or an IP address or a number, a floating point number or a date or time or whatever, and it will automatically generate all these parameters for you. So it will try edge cases, it will try many things for a given runtime, like 1 second or maybe something like this, and try to make your test fail. So it can be useful to to automatically test your program for much more cases. So you can generate like dates, a lot of kind of numbers, email addresses, dictionaries, float, objects, integers, IP addresses, list, random numbers. So you can generate sets, a lot of things, and it's not always easy to find a good use case for this library, but sometimes it's useful. So that's the first thing, parametrized test, so that you don't have to duplicate your code. And another useful thing, so to avoid code duplication, it's what's called fixtures. So a fixtures is, at least in the context of PyTest, is a function that will be run by default before each test and after each test. So more precisely, if you write a code like I create an account, I yield, so I will explain this, and then I can do like account point. Let's suppose that I have this network closed. Basically, the part with the yield, so the part before the yield will be executed before the test, and the part after the yield will be executed after the test. So here it's not very useful, but for example, you may want to connect to a database or open a file, and you want to automatically close or delete the file. For example, if it's a temporary file, you may want to automatically delete the file after the test as well. So you can use fixtures for that. Actually, there's already built-in fixtures in PyTest for creating temporary files. It's very, very useful. I use it all the time. So you have the temp path and temp dir fixtures. And if you write a test, so let me show you, if I write a test like if test fixture, and I take as an input temporary path, so yes, so here we can see that so I'm running just this test fixtures, and I can print this path. So here it gives me a temporary path, which is called TMP path, but this path doesn't exist anymore on my computer. Actually it exists. Okay, it should be deleted, or maybe it's deleted after some time, but anyway, it returns a temporary path every time you run the function. So that can be useful if you want to write files. And you can also, for example, if you connect to a database, you don't want to open and close the connection to the database at every test. So you can have different scopes. You can do it for every test file, every test class, and so on. I'm not going to go into more details, but just note that you can do this. So to give you the expected answer for this, so let's refactor these two tests. Here we test the withdraw method, but to withdraw money, we need money on the account. So we create an account and we deposit some money. So instead, let's create a sample account which already has some money. So we will create a fixture with where we create an account. And I will return the account. Okay, and now I can just use my sample account here. Let me replace account with sample account. I will do the same here. And now, and so now I have removed duplication of the code. Okay, I'm just using this sample. So that's kind of useful if you have, you know, an application where you have complex data structure to initialize and so on with some specific values, you can use Fixtures to do this, or to create file and delete them automatically afterward, this kind of thing. And now the last thing, so there's a bug kind of in the code in that if you were to deposit, I mean, it's not very really a bug in the sense that mathematically it's correct, but if you were to deposit an infinite amount of money on the account, you could withdraw, I mean, an infinite amount of money, right? Because infinite minus 2 minus 10, it's equal to the infinite in Python. So we would like to prevent people from depositing, or at least from calling this method with an infinite amount of money, because maybe the input is not trusted and someone will put infinite in there. So so I already written a test for this, but the test failed, right? If I run it, the test fails because I expect, if I deposit an infinite amount of money, I expect to get infinite deposit exception, but I don't have it. So sometimes you want to write test for code that is currently broken, but you don't want to fix right now because you don't have the time or you don't know how to fix it. So for that, instead of making a test that failed, you can mark the test as expected failure, so X fail, and this tells PyTest to not fail the test, actually to ignore the test and say one test expected failure. This is useful because let's say that now you fixed, so let's fix this. So in deposit, we also need to check if amount, something like this, is infinite deposit exception. So I fixed the issue. I check if the deposited amount is infinite and I raise an exception. And yes, and now the test pass. So we can also remove this if we want. But what's useful is that before knowing that, when I had this kind of test, I was just commenting it because I didn't want it to fail on my test. But yet I wanted, to fix it at some point. But I think a better way is to use the expected failure markup. So this way, it's still going to run the test and tell you that there was an expected failure, but not fail. Here the exit code is 0, so your test, if you're doing continuous integration or this kind of stuff, the test will still pass. That's all for today. So I hope you learned some things. It was kind of basic, but if you want to learn more, you can go to the Python Doctest documentation where they give you much more detailed examples, and also on the PyTest documentation where they explain everything you can do with it. I haven't explained everything you have. Other useful things like monkey patch to replace functions in your code with another function or this kind of thing. That's also, if you have any question, just let me know.